For more than 6 long months, the disappearance of siblings Lilly and Jack Sullivan has cast a heavy shadow over the quiet communities of Pictou County, Nova Scotia. Despite massive search efforts stretching from dense forest to riverbanks, the 2 young children just 6 and 5 years old remain unaccounted for. Their case has become one of the most haunting and closely watched missing child investigations in the region. This week, volunteers uncovered several items along the Middle River, including a child's t-shirt, a blanket, and a small tricycle. For a brief moment, hope surged that these discoveries might finally lead investigators closer to answers. But RCMP quickly confirmed the items were not connected to the case. Even so, search organizers say that ruling out possibilities is still meaningful progress, especially in an area this vast and challenging. Leading this latest search is Nick Oldrieve from the Ontario-based organization Please Bring Me Home. His team, made up of experienced volunteers including former military personnel, has spent hours combing difficult terrain, logging precise coordinates, and documenting every find. Oldrieve stresses that in missing persons cases, negative results help refine the search map, guiding investigators toward what remains unexplored. As winter approaches, urgency grows. The heavily wooded region around the children's home has been searched repeatedly, marked with ribbons and tags from earlier operations. Oldrieve now questions whether Lilly and Jack could have gone into the forest unnoticed, suggesting the river may hold the most logical answers. Tonight, we break down what was discovered, what it means, and why the search for truth continues, driven by a community that refuses to give up hope. The search for Lilly and Jack Sullivan entered a new phase as volunteers returned to the Middle River area, determined to uncover any evidence that might finally explain what happened to the missing siblings. After months of silence and uncertainty, even the smallest discovery carried emotional weight, pushing searches through harsh terrain and unpredictable weather as they combed the riverbanks once again. During the operation, several items were found: a child's t-shirt, a soft blanket, and a small tricycle resting partly in the brush. Each discovery was photographed, logged, and handled with care. For many volunteers, the moment felt heavy. These objects could have represented a breakthrough, offering hope that perhaps a long-awaited clue had finally emerged from the wilderness. But when the RCMP reviewed the items, investigators quickly concluded that none of them were connected to Lilly or Jack. The news delivered a sharp emotional blow. After months of searching, the smallest lead feels monumental, and its dismissal can be deeply discouraging. Still, the search team emphasized that even negative results contribute meaningfully to the investigation. Search leader Nick Oldrieve reminded his team that lack of evidence is evidence in itself. In cases involving missing children, ruling out areas is a critical part of the process. Each confirmed negative helps narrow the search map, eliminating possibilities and reducing the number of locations that must be checked before winter makes the terrain far more difficult to navigate. Volunteers participating in this latest search came from a range of backgrounds. Some had previously joined community searches, while others brought professional experience, including a retired military member with 8 years of ground search and rescue training. Their combined knowledge strengthened the team's ability to conduct a precise, methodical operation. The team divided into small groups of 6, ensuring every member knew their assigned section of the river and forest. They moved carefully through thick brush, slippery rocks, and cold riverbanks, checking areas previously untouched and revisiting others to confirm earlier findings. Every movement was intentional, focused on eliminating blind spots. One of the most striking aspects of the search was how meticulously the volunteers documented their work. Each item found relevant or not was marked with GPS coordinates, photographed from multiple angles, and described in detail. These records will later be delivered to the RCMP to support ongoing investigative efforts, ensuring nothing is overlooked. Despite the emotional weight of the case, volunteers remained composed and focused. Many described the mood as somber, heavy with the reality that 6 months have passed since the children disappeared. Yet beneath that heaviness was a quiet determination, a shared belief that answers must exist, even if they haven't surfaced yet. The Middle River region has become a central point of interest in recent searches. Strong currents, unpredictable depths, and dense vegetation make the area challenging to explore. But for Oldrieve and his team, these difficulties only strengthen their resolve to revisit the river as many times as necessary. Over the course of several hours, Searches covered long stretches of shoreline and forest edges. Some areas were so densely marked with ribbons and tags from previous searches that it became clear how thoroughly parts of the woods had already been examined. This level of marking is rarely seen, underscoring just how extensive efforts have been. Seeing the forest so heavily searched led Oldreeve to an important observation. It is becoming increasingly unlikely that Lilly and Jack simply wandered into the woods. After so many months and countless searches, he struggles to imagine a scenario in which both children remained undetected in that terrain. This realization has refocused attention on the river itself. Bodies of water pose unique challenges, often concealing evidence that land searches cannot reach. Oldreeve believes the river may hold the most logical explanation, though no definitive signs have been found yet. Still, the theory cannot be dismissed given nearby access points and terrain patterns. As volunteers pushed through the final stretches of the day, fatigue set in. The emotional toll of searching for missing children, especially after months without answers, can be overwhelming. Yet each person continued forward, driven by compassion for the family and an unwavering belief in the importance of their work. RCMP later issued a statement expressing sincere gratitude for the efforts of the Please Bring Me Home volunteers. Collaborative searches like this extend the reach of law enforcement and allow large areas of land to be covered more efficiently than official teams alone could manage. These combined efforts also help maintain momentum in long-running cases. After 6 months, public attention can fade, but continued volunteer involvement keeps the case in focus, reminding the community that Lilly and Jack are still missing and still need to be found. Oldreeve emphasized that time is becoming a factor. With winter approaching, conditions around the river will soon become far more dangerous. Snowfall and freezing temperatures could hide crucial evidence or make certain areas completely inaccessible until spring. Because of this, the team wanted to complete one more extensive search before weather conditions change. Their hope is to gather as much information as possible, whether it leads to answers or simply rules out additional areas on the map. For the families involved, every update carries deep emotional weight. Belinda Gray, the children's paternal grandmother, initially sought Oldreeve's help, desperate for renewed momentum in the search. Her involvement reflects how crucial family advocacy becomes in long-term missing person cases. As day turned to evening, volunteers gathered to review their logs and prepare the documentation to send to RCMP. Though no breakthrough emerged, they left with the reassurance that the work done was meaningful, that every step taken, every area cleared, and every item cataloged moved the investigation forward. Tonight, the search continues not just on the ground, but in the hearts of those who refuse to give up on Lilly and Jack Sullivan. While answers remain elusive, the determination of volunteers, family members, and investigators ensures that both children will never be forgotten. Hope persists, even in the face of silence. As investigators reviewed the new records from the volunteer search, the level of detail struck them immediately. Every coordinate, every item, and every section of terrain had been logged with precision. Though none of the objects were linked to the children, the documentation created a clearer picture of what had already been covered and what remained uncertain. RCMP analysts began comparing the new search grids with previous maps. Overlapping zones showed consistency, while newly explored areas helped fill gaps left from earlier operations. In long-term missing child investigations, clarity becomes as valuable as evidence, and these logs provided exactly that, a carefully stitched reconstruction of months of effort. Meanwhile, Nick Oldreeve continued speaking with volunteers who had participated in earlier searches. Their first-hand accounts helped identify patterns, natural barriers, steep banks, and dense brush that could hinder both searches and visibility. Understanding these obstacles mattered because they shaped theories on where the children could, or could not, have traveled. One volunteer described how the river's edges changed dramatically with rainfall, noting how fast-moving currents can shift objects or conceal them entirely. This reinforced the possibility that if Lilly and Jack had approached the water, evidence might have been carried downstream, making recovery extremely difficult. At the same time, Oldreeve revisited the initial missing person report filed by the children's mother, Malehya Brooks Murray. The timeline had been examined repeatedly, yet any detail that could reframe the search remained critical. He reviewed how quickly responders arrived, when neighbors were alerted, and how long the children were believed to be unsupervised. While RCMP had no evidence pointing to foul play, the prolonged lack of findings continued to raise difficult questions. Searches this extensive typically yield something: an item of clothing, a footprint, or a trace indicating direction. The absence of all such clues made the case unusually challenging and deeply unsettling. In many missing child cases, early assumptions can shape the entire investigation. That is why Oldreeve stressed examining every possibility with equal weight. Even if the river seemed increasingly likely, the team refused to discount alternate paths the children might have taken before vanishing. Volunteers also shared observations about wildlife activity in the region. Coyotes, bears, and other animals inhabit the surrounding forests, and while there was no evidence of an encounter, it remained a variable investigators could not ignore. Nature's unpredictability often complicates search operations in ways human behavior does not. RCMP later confirmed that specialized teams had previously searched the area using cadaver dogs. These dogs, trained to detect even faint traces of decomposition, had found nothing in the woods. Their involvement added weight to Oldreeve's belief that the forest was becoming an increasingly unlikely location. In reviewing the search records, investigators noted how the riverbank's structure shifted seasonally. Fallen leaves, rising water levels, and new debris could easily obscure something that might have been visible months earlier. This forced the team to question whether earlier searches might have unintentionally missed evidence that is now covered. As discussions continued, Oldreeve emphasized that long-term searches test the emotional endurance of everyone involved. Volunteers often battle frustration, guilt, and doubt, feeling as though the outcome depends entirely on their ability to spot something amid overwhelming terrain. Still, each volunteer expressed the same sentiment: they wanted answers for the family. Even those who had never met the children felt a deep responsibility, driven by empathy and a desire for closure. Cases involving young siblings vanishing together carry a weight that leaves no one untouched. Authorities also recognized the importance of maintaining communication with the public. Regular updates prevent misinformation from spreading, especially online, where speculation can distort facts. Transparency, even when there are no breakthroughs, keeps focus on the truth and protects the integrity of the investigation. One challenge investigators faced was balancing hope with realism. On one hand, finding the children alive had grown increasingly unlikely. On the other, acknowledging that possibility publicly demanded sensitivity, caution, and compassion toward the family still waiting for answers. With winter approaching, RCMP and volunteer leaders discussed whether future water-based searches might require specialized equipment: drones, sonar, or divers trained for cold conditions. However, these operations are costly and logistically complex, requiring careful consideration. Oldreeve stressed that until weather conditions became unsafe, the team would continue pushing forward. He believed firmly that every additional day spent searching before snowfall increased the chance of locating anything that could finally confirm or refute their theories. Volunteers also prepared for the possibility that the investigation could enter a winter hiatus. In such cases, search teams often shift focus to data review, mapping, and planning future operations, ensuring readiness when spring conditions allow renewed ground searches. Throughout the process, the children's grandmother, Belinda Gray, remained a central figure. Her persistence in seeking outside help had rekindled momentum in the case. She continued advocating for more searches, more eyes, and more resources dedicated to bringing Lilly and Jack home. Though no new evidence emerged, the renewed effort strengthened community awareness. Residents began revisiting their own memories from early May, questioning whether anything, no matter how small, might have gone unnoticed or unreported at the time. As part two closes, the investigation stands at a critical intersection. The river remains the strongest possibility, the forest increasingly unlikely, and time dangerously limited. Yet the determination of volunteers, RCMP, and the family ensures that the search will not slow, not until the fate of Lilly and Jack Sullivan is finally understood. As the investigation progressed, RCMP began examining how environmental factors may have influenced the disappearance. The landscape around Lansdowne Station is uniquely complex. Steep slopes, tangled underbrush, and shifting riverbanks create natural traps capable of obscuring even significant evidence. Understanding these conditions became essential to forming clearer search hypotheses. Meteorological data from early May was reviewed to determine whether heavy rain or high river levels could have contributed to accidental slips or falls. The Middle River is known for unpredictable surges, particularly during spring, when melting snow increases its volume. These natural patterns raised the possibility that the children encountered hazardous conditions without warning. At the same time, investigators revisited witness statements from neighbors and residents in the area. Although none reported seeing the children on the day they vanished, subtle details, sounds, movement, unusual activity were analyzed again for potential relevance. Even months later, a small recollection can become meaningful. Digital forensics teams also reviewed phone records, security footage, and online activity. While the rural community has limited camera coverage, a few properties with surveillance systems were examined. Nothing captured the children leaving the property, reinforcing the theory that they likely remained close to home or near the river before disappearing. In the meantime, search coordinators evaluated whether scent-trailing dogs could be redeployed. However, after several months, weather exposure and environmental contamination significantly reduced scent traces. Cadaver dogs had already been used once, and deploying them again would likely yield similar results unless new evidence surfaced. Community members continued to question how the children could disappear without a trace. Some expressed concern that the thick forest may hide dangers not immediately obvious: old wells, abandoned structures, or steep gullies. Past maps and survey records were examined to ensure no hazardous areas had been overlooked. During these reviews, investigators found that the property surrounding the home had undergone multiple searches by both volunteers and professionals. Every corner had been marked, cleared, or resurveyed. The sheer volume of markings, ribbons, stakes, and tags suggested nearly exhaustive coverage. This extensive marking was what led Nick Oldreive to publicly acknowledge his growing doubt regarding the forest. "I can't think of where they could have been missed," he said. His words resonated. If the woods had been searched this thoroughly, the probability that both children remained within them diminished substantially. Attention then shifted toward water-based search methods. River patterns, flow rates, and historical incident data were reviewed. Experts noted that in several past cases, water had concealed evidence for weeks or months before being discovered downstream or caught in debris fields. Specialists warned that certain areas of the Middle River contained deep pockets and undercurrents capable of trapping objects below the surface. Without advanced sonar equipment, these zones remained difficult, sometimes impossible to fully search. This limitation weighed heavily on the planning of future operations. While water remained a leading theory, investigators continued to examine human factors. They reviewed the children's typical routines, behaviors, and tendencies. Did they often play near water? Were they adventurous? Did they wander far from home? These psychological insights are frequently vital in child disappearance cases. Friends and extended family were consulted again, though no new information emerged. Everyone who knew Lilly and Jack described them as playful and curious traits that could lead to wandering, but also traits that usually leave behind noticeable traces such as footprints or disturbed vegetation. Searches also considered whether the children might have followed an animal, as young kids sometimes do. Paths commonly used by wildlife were retraced, yet nothing suggested a significant disturbance. The absence of physical signs remained one of the most puzzling elements of the entire case. Another factor investigators analyzed was the timeline between the mother noticing the children missing and the first call for help. Even a short delay can influence how far a child might travel. In this case, the timeline was believed to be relatively narrow, suggesting the children could not have realistically moved long distances on foot. However, the search area had grown massively due to uncertainty about direction and terrain complexity. The radius extended across thick forests, steep ravines, and the river corridor. Each expansion added hours of manpower, yet produced the same results: zero confirmed evidence. As frustrations mounted, investigators reminded the public that long-running searches often progress slowly. "People expect definitive outcomes," one RCMP spokesperson noted, "but sometimes the lack of evidence is the evidence. It tells us where they are not, and that is crucial information." Amid all the strategic discussions, volunteers remained the heart of the operation. Their willingness to return repeatedly, often traveling long distances, demonstrated the emotional impact the case had left on the region. In many ways, the search had become a community mission. Oldreive continued gathering data from each volunteer group, ensuring that no detail was overlooked. Even personal observations, odd smells, animal paths, possible footprints were recorded. These small notes often help identify patterns when layered across hundreds of search entries. He also emphasized the importance of psychological endurance. Searching for missing children over long periods can take a severe mental toll. Volunteers were encouraged to rest, debrief, and return only when emotionally ready, ensuring the quality and safety of the operation remained high. As Part 3 concludes, the investigation stands on a delicate balance of hope and harsh reality. Every corner of the forest has been searched. The river remains a powerful, unresolved question. And the community of Pictou County continues to wait quietly, anxiously, desperately for the moment when the truth about Lilly and Jack Sullivan finally comes to light. As investigators trace the narrowing possibilities, attention turned toward the dynamics of community-driven searches. In many missing child cases, volunteer groups often fill critical gaps, especially when official resources stretch thin over long periods. The Sullivan case became a profound example of how public dedication can sustain momentum even when leads run dry. Oldrive noted that each volunteer brought a distinct perspective: hunters familiar with the terrain, hikers who knew lesser-known trails, and residents who understood seasonal changes in the landscape. These diverse insights created a layered understanding of the environment, improving the accuracy of search patterns and strategic planning. One major advantage volunteers provided was adaptability. Unlike formal search teams limited by protocol, volunteers could quickly adjust routes, re-examine suspicious areas, or follow new observations without administrative delays. This flexibility allowed them to cover larger regions in shorter time spans. During debrief sessions, several volunteers mentioned how the terrain's natural acoustics may have masked sounds on the day the children vanished. Wind patterns, flowing water, and dense foliage can distort or carry sound in unpredictable ways. This suggested that even if the children had called out, their voices might not have traveled far. Environmental noise led investigators to analyze wind reports from the afternoon of May 2nd. The data indicated moderate gusts along the river corridor, which could have contributed to reduced auditory visibility. In child disappearance cases, such elements can dramatically affect search outcomes during the initial hours. Meanwhile, Oldrive continued searching for overlooked environmental hazards. The team inspected river access points, sharp drop-offs hidden by vegetation, and areas with slippery rocks where children could lose footing. These subtle but dangerous features reinforced the possibility of an accidental fall. In one heavily wooded section, searchers found remnants of old fencing and collapsed wooden structures, possible hazards for small children. Though these areas had been searched earlier, Oldrive ensured they were carefully re-evaluated. No evidence was found, but the review strengthened confidence that nothing in those zones was missed. Water experts consulted by the team explained how river debris patterns work, especially in spring. If the children fell into the river, currents could transport objects downstream to catch on branches, rocks, or submerged logs. This raised the possibility that relevant items might lie far from the initial search area. Because of this, volunteers expanded their downstream sweeps, exploring bends, shallow points, and natural catchments. They examined root tangles, debris piles, and submerged branches, but again, no definitive evidence surfaced. Still, the detailed logs contributed valuable information for future river-targeted searches. The emotional toll increased as volunteers repeatedly confronted the idea that they might be searching for remains. Oldrive acknowledged the difficulty openly, reminding the team that honesty, no matter how painful, was essential in maintaining clear priorities and avoiding false optimism. Psychologists familiar with long-term search operations noted that emotional fatigue can cloud judgment. To counter this, Oldrive encouraged volunteers to rotate roles. Some took breaks from field work to handle documentation, while others assisted in mapping or analyzing GPS data. This balance kept the operation focused and effective. As the search map grew more refined, investigators revisited the children's behavioral tendencies. Both Lilly and Jack were young to navigate complex terrain intentionally. This reaffirmed theories that their disappearance was likely accidental rather than purposeful or coordinated. However, investigators did not rule out the possibility of misdirection. In rare cases, footprints or small disturbances missed early on can shift search direction away from the actual route children took. This potential oversight pushed searches to re-examine boundary areas where forest transitions into marsh or rock formations. RCMP also stressed that the public should continue reporting anything unusual, even months later. People often remember or notice details long after an incident, especially when reminded by news coverage or community discussions. One small observation could realign the search in a meaningful way. In reviewing public tips, investigators found several reports of possible sounds or sightings on the day of the disappearance, though none could be corroborated. Still, these accounts were documented and placed on the timeline, contributing to a fuller understanding of community activity that day. Community involvement extended beyond search efforts. Local residents organized support events, raised funds for additional resources, and helped provide meals for volunteers. Their participation demonstrated that the disappearance of two young children had become a shared tragedy uniting the region in a collective mission for answers. Oldreeve frequently reminded volunteers that every well-documented search reduces uncertainty. Even when outcomes were discouraging, clearing a location ensured future efforts wouldn't waste time revisiting the same ground. This long-term mindset has sustained many difficult investigations in the past. Behind the scenes, investigators prepared contingency plans for winter. Frozen ground and icy waters severely limit search options, but they also preserve landscapes, making certain evidence more detectable in spring. These seasonal considerations shape decisions about where to focus remaining autumn efforts. As temperatures dropped, volunteers raced against time to complete remaining passes along the river. Each day of good weather mattered. Teams covered ground efficiently, knowing that once snow arrived, the terrain would become both dangerous and deceptive, hiding footprints, fabric, or any other trace of the children. As Part 4 concludes, the search has evolved into a disciplined, highly coordinated effort balanced between science, intuition, and sheer determination. The river theory grows stronger, the forest theory weaker. And yet, the central truth remains painfully unchanged. Lilly and Jack are still missing, and until they are found, the search will not rest. As winter loomed closer, the investigative focus intensified on reviewing accumulated data from months of searching. Every coordinate, sighting, and environmental note from volunteers was re-examined. This stage of the investigation acted as a critical moment of reflection and opportunity to reassess what had been ruled out, what remained uncertain, and what patterns might have gone unnoticed the first time. Investigators began layering digital maps from each search phase to identify consistencies or anomalies. When individual maps were stacked, certain gaps appeared: small pockets of land difficult to reach, areas blocked by fallen trees, or sections where search lines might have unintentionally overlapped too tightly or left narrow strips untouched. These overlooked zones became priority targets for final pre-winter sweeps. Volunteers familiar with the terrain understood how deceptively easy it was to miss small depressions or narrow river inlets during large operations. Even a few feet of dense brush could conceal critical evidence if timing and angle worked against searches. Further complicating matters was the shifting river environment. Water levels in early May differed from the current conditions, and spring runoff could have easily moved objects long distances. Oldreeve brought in local anglers and river experts to outline how seasonal variations might alter the river's behavior. These consultations revealed several potential deposition zones, areas where objects drifting downstream naturally accumulate. Some had been searched before, but changes in foliage and water levels suggested they warranted another, more rigorous look. Volunteers prepared to revisit them carefully, despite knowing the chances of new discoveries were slim. Meanwhile, RCMP continued analyzing psychological profiles both of the children and of common scenarios involving sibling disappearances. Cases involving two young children vanishing together are rare, and typically one child leaves behind evidence even if the other does not. The complete absence of clues deepened the sense of mystery. Theories involving misadventure remained the strongest. Investigators believed that if one child slipped or fell, the other, especially at such a young age, might instinctively follow or attempt to help. This natural sibling behavior aligned with accidental water entry models used in similar cases throughout Canada. As part of this analysis, investigators consulted experts in child mobility to estimate how far children aged 5 and 6 could realistically travel in given time frames. Their models suggested a limited radius, reinforcing earlier assumptions that the children had likely not moved far from home before the incident occurred. Volunteers revisited the family property as well, not to search but to understand vantage points, blind spots, and pathways the children might have naturally followed. Subtle elements, a worn patch of grass, a faint trail between bushes often provide insights into the movement patterns of children who frequently play outdoors. One such detail caught attention, a narrow gap between two trees leading toward the river. While previously noted, seeing it again in the context of finalized search maps suggested it may have been one of the most natural paths the children would take if approaching the water unsupervised. Investigators then expanded the timeline review surrounding the disappearance. They re-evaluated the sequence of events, response times, and distances traveled by first responders. Even minor clarifications could recalibrate search theories, especially if the children had moved quickly in those early moments. As the theoretical framework sharpened, searchers returned to the water one final time before temperatures dropped dangerously. Wearing insulated waders and moving slowly along the shoreline, they used long poles to feel underwater depressions and tested submerged logs for trapped debris. In certain locations, volunteers used drone cameras to scan from above. The drones revealed subtle patterns in vegetation and water flow that were difficult to see from ground level. Though no evidence of the children was found, these scans added further clarity to the evolving environmental picture. Media attention surrounding the case intensified as winter approached. National outlets revisited the story, drawing public focus back to the missing children. This renewed attention triggered a new wave of tips, none substantial, but each documented meticulously as investigators sought even the faintest lead. Support for the family continued to grow. Community vigils were organized, displaying photos of Lilly and Jack along riverbanks and roadsides. These gatherings served two purposes: honoring the missing siblings and reminding the public that the search effort remained active and deeply urgent. Behind the scenes, investigators and volunteers discussed long-term strategy. If winter halted ground operations, efforts would shift toward data consolidation, advanced mapping, and planning for potential spring searches. Experience taught them that careful winter preparation can dramatically improve spring efficiency. Oldreive made it clear that, despite the emotional toll, the team would not scale back commitment. He emphasized that the community deserved answers not years later, not only when conditions improved, but as soon as any feasible effort could safely continue the search. The psychological strain on the family was acknowledged often. For parents and grandparents of missing children, holidays and seasonal changes can be especially devastating reminders. Investigators maintained communication with the family to provide transparency and reassurance that the case remained active. Throughout these final autumn weeks, the search team pushed forward with a sense of urgency and quiet desperation. Every remaining day before snowfall represented another opportunity to find what had been hidden for months. Yet despite renewed effort, the outcome remained heartbreakingly unchanged. As Part 5 ends, winter stands at the doorstep. The river theory holds its place as the most compelling explanation. The forest, despite exhaustive coverage, yields nothing. And the children Lilly and Jack remain missing. But what has not changed is the determination. The search is not abandoned. The community is not giving up. And the truth, no matter how long it hides, will continue to be pursued. As the first cold winds of winter swept through Pictou County, investigators and volunteers faced a stark reality: ground searches would soon become impossible. Snow would bury traces, frozen earth would halt excavation, and ice forming along the river would make underwater operations too dangerous. The case had reached a pivotal seasonal turning point. In the final weeks before winter, RCMP focused on consolidating every piece of information collected throughout the 6-month search. Handwritten notepads, GPS pins, digital logs, drone footage, and volunteer maps were transferred into a central system. Nothing could be allowed to slip through the cracks as the investigation entered its winter phase. Data specialists began running movement simulations based on terrain, weather, and child behavior models. These algorithms recreated potential paths the children might have taken. Almost every simulation pointed to the same conclusion investigators had already suspected: the direction of the river remained the most logical and consistent possibility. Yet a troubling question lingered: if the children approached the river, why had no personal items been recovered? No shoes, no clothing, no toys. This absence of secondary evidence pushed investigators to consider whether the river's early spring currents had carried objects far downstream or trapped them beneath submerged debris. Because of this, officials discussed the option of a specialized underwater search in the spring. Sonar scans, dive teams, and remotely operated devices could explore areas unreachable during the initial months. But these operations were expensive and required significant coordination and approval before planning could begin. Meanwhile, RCMP continued receiving information from local residents. Many admitted the case haunted them daily. They replayed their memories from early May, searching for details they might have ignored at the time. New tips arrived, but none offered a breakthrough, though every report was carefully documented. The volunteer teams, equally affected, understood the weight of their role. Even if searches found nothing, each cleared area shrank the uncertainty surrounding the children's disappearance. Their efforts helped eliminate possibilities, and in a case with no physical evidence, eliminating the wrong answers mattered as much as finding the right one. Internal discussions among volunteers focused on silent zones, places technically searched but not with enough certainty to be considered fully cleared. These zones were often boundaries where to search grids met, areas vulnerable to oversight due to mismatched lines or dense brush. Before winter fully settled in, Oldreeve coordinated one final sweep near a wooded stretch beside the river, where fallen trees created natural pockets and hollow spaces. These were areas where children might unintentionally become trapped. Every hollow, root system, and collapsed log was inspected. Nothing was found. The lack of evidence left many volunteers troubled. How could two children vanish without leaving even the smallest trace? This question had tormented teams for 6 months, and as the year drew closer to its end, it remained an answer dark, heavy, and deeply unsettling. Child behavior experts were consulted again. Their assessments were consistent. Children aged 5 and 6 do not typically travel far from the last known point unless pulled by curiosity toward water, animals, movement, or noise. In the immediate area around the home, only one feature matched those triggers: the Middle River. This was an emotionally devastating stage for the family. With winter holidays approaching, the absence of Lilly and Jack felt even sharper. Still, they remained in close contact with RCMP, asking questions, following updates, and holding on to any hope that a new discovery might surface. Another concern investigators explored was whether the earliest searches conducted urgently by neighbors may have unintentionally disturbed small clues. In chaotic missing child scenes, well-intended actions can erase footprints or displace soft evidence. It was another frustrating possibility, without a clear answer. RCMP acknowledged that despite enormous effort, the golden hours yielded no tangible evidence. And now, months later, that consequence was clear: too many unknowns, too many empty spaces in the timeline, and too few physical markers to draw definitive conclusions. Investigators once again reviewed the complete timeline: the moment the children were last seen, the time the mother called for help, the arrival of neighbors, and the first RCMP responders. Every minute was reevaluated. No inconsistencies appeared, nothing that suggested the children could have gone far. This reinforced the
As the missing persons investigation into the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan continues, we are appealing to the public for additional video footage. Investigators have collected hours of video from areas surrounding Lansdowne Station. Based on details gathered so far, we have confirmed that Lilly and Jack were observed in public with family members on the afternoon of May 1st. Investigators are now asking anyone who has dash cam footage or video along Garlick Road between noon on April 28th and noon on May 2nd to contact Northeast Nova RCMP Major Crime Unit. Investigators remain committed to exploring all possibilities surrounding the children's disappearance. To date, more than 355 tips have been received, and we are following up on the information provided. RCMP officers have also formally interviewed over 50 people, with more interviews planned in the coming days. Investigative work is ongoing following the large-scale ground and air search that began immediately after the children were reported missing on May 2nd. Hundreds of searchers, multiple dogs, a variety of drones, an underwater recovery team, and several aircraft scoured a heavily wooded 5.5 square kilometer area before search efforts were scaled back on May 7th. Additional searches took place on May 8th, May 9th, May 17th, and May 18th. Any future searches will be determined based on the course of the investigation. RCMP officers from various teams are fully engaged in finding out what happened to Jack and Lilly. We're using all tools and resources to determine the circumstances of their disappearance. Anyone with information on the whereabouts of Jack and Lilly, or who has video footage to share with police, is asked to call the Northeast Nova Major Crimes Unit. To remain anonymous, you can also contact Nova Scotia Crime Stoppers.
Theory that if an accident occurred, it likely happened quickly and close to home. With the forest thoroughly searched and cadaver dogs deployed with no success, the river remained the theory that best aligned with the available data, however grim that possibility was. As daylight faded earlier each day, volunteers shifted their efforts indoors. Mapping, cross-referencing, and analyzing search logs replaced the physical sweeps of spring and summer. Though less visible, this behind-the-scenes work was essential for shaping efficient search plans for the coming spring. At this stage, everyone involved understood that the case had evolved from a typical missing child search into something more complex, a puzzle with critical pieces missing. It was a matter of reconstructing the truth from what wasn't there as much as from what was. In investigative theory, this is called silent evidence, when the absence of clues becomes a clue itself. In this case, the silence of the forest had grown louder with every search, reinforcing the possibility that the river, not the woods, held the answers to what happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan. As Part 6 closes, the case enters its most difficult chapter. No new discoveries, no sudden leads, but also no surrender. Winter may pause physical searches, but it will not silence the determination of investigators, volunteers, and the family. When the ground thaws and the river opens again, the search for Lilly and Jack will continue with the same hope that has carried it since day one. As winter settles over Nova Scotia, the search for Lilly and Jack Sullivan pauses only in the physical sense. The truth, still hidden somewhere between the forest and the river, continues to press heavily on the hearts of investigators, volunteers, and an entire community unwilling to give up. 6 months have passed without a single confirmed clue. Yet the determination to bring these children home has never faded. Every search log, every mapped coordinate, every hour spent scanning riverbanks and woods will guide the next phase when spring returns. Tonight, we close this chapter not with answers, but with resolve. For Lilly, for Jack, and for the families who wake each day searching for hope in the silence. If you have any information, no matter how small, about the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, please contact local authorities or Crime Stoppers immediately. And to our viewers, please like, share, and subscribe to True Child Cases. Your support helps keep these children's stories alive, extends their reach, and brings vital attention to cases that should never be forgotten. Together, we seek truth. Together, we stand for every missing child. Thank you for watching True Child Cases.